and just because we call it the same doesn't mean we see the same thing. But that's not how it feels. That's absolutely not how it feels. All right. So, therefore, very strong, a lot of reasons, and we don't need to go into them, but it's easy for you. You can figure those out. There is no objective experience. It's totally subjective. And there's always an object. So there's always an object that is part of the mind. Because the mind always experiences something. Even if it's nothingness, just blackness, there's still something there. So we experience being awake, being asleep, dreaming, and even dying. We do experience being asleep. We just don't remember when we wake up. We experience dying. The mind sees, hears, smells, tastes, and experiences tangible objects. Mind also includes the rational, intellectual aspects on one side and the emotional, intuitive aspects on the other. It both thinks and feels. So there are different minds popping up. There's the thinking mind, the judgmental mind, right? And popping up one after the other, one giving rise to the next. And although the mind is different from the brain, there's no contradiction to scientific findings of the importance and the influence of the brain on the mind. No contradiction. Because from a Buddhist perspective, the coarser mind, the one that when we awake, or when we're dreaming, those are coarser types of mind. Though the dreaming mind is a little subtler than the awakened mind, but then in comparison to deep sleep mind or dying mind, they're much coarser. So they're very much dependent on the brain. So though they are different entities, they have a close relationship in that one can alter and influence the other. So the brain can influence chemical, compositions in the brain can alter our perception, and our perception alters the chemical, what's it called? Chemical proposition of the brain. And actually, according to one text, Pramanavartika, there's a very strong reasoning saying the mind has actually a stronger effect on the brain than vice versa. Especially if you've trained your mind. If you've trained your mind, your brain has very little effect has less and less effect on your body. On your mind, sorry. Your brain has less and less effect on your mind. But your mind always has a great effect on the body. So it's actually mind over body. We feel the body creates the mind. But the mind creates the body. So, living in Israel, you living in Israel, me being in Israel, where so much organic stuff, right? Because people are very health conscious. It's very important to work on your own mind because the chemicals your mind releases in your body cannot be underestimated. And there's actually been quite an amount of research on like anger. What happens when we're angry and have aversion, right? The Buddha himself said, well, anger is like eating poison and expecting the other person to die. It's a good one, right? Mm-hmm. Anger is like taking poison and expecting the other to die. We don't harm the other person, we harm ourselves, really. But that is just from the point of view of just mental harm. But scientists have found that when we get angry, when we have aversion and hatred, it actually creates some energy. Don't ask me what exactly that means, it's really hazy basically, but it creates some energy which in turn creates chemicals in the body which harm our immune system. So you can Google it when you're done here, after you get your phones back. So you can Google this, maybe make a little note. There's so much available now, so much research that you can actually follow online on the fact that every time we have a thought, there are actually chemicals released in the body. So they've done these tests, in particular with regard to anger. I forget now the exact, something to do with serotonin and that you need for your immune system. So when you get angry, I think the production of serotonin gets hampered or whatever, and so then your immune system suffers. So to be healthier, eat organic, drink organic soya milk, and don't be angry. Right? No, I'm kidding about the soya milk, I don't know whether that's true, but the point is, eat organic food and be less angry. Right? So actually this health craze that we're in, which just has its positive sides, it's very helpful to talk about removing certain states of mind because it makes us healthier physically. Because the other person doesn't really get harmed by our anger. If they choose to ignore it, right? They don't get harmed by it. They only get harmed by it when it makes them angry. So in the end, it's really, as the Buddha says, like eating poison and expecting the other person to die. All right. But nonetheless, so there is a close relationship between mind and body. And if you study the second chapter of the Pramanavartika and combine it with new findings, new scientific findings, it makes actually sense that it's the mind that creates the body and not the other way around. But this takes into consideration past and future lives, and I'll leave it out for now. All right. Therefore, stimulating or altering parts of the brain has an effect on the mind, and transforming the mind changes the chemical reactions and the neurons of the brain. And so also, every living being has a mind that is different from other living beings' minds. They can be very similar. Not saying that they're not very similar. We can have very similar thoughts and similar, especially when it comes from a similar culture. Of course, this is why we like to be with people from our own cultures, because we have a similar way of thinking oftentimes. But that doesn't mean my mind is the other person's mind and the other person's is my mind. No. So sometimes people have this idea of like, oh, once you become enlightened, you become part of this big ocean of mind. Well, even if that were true, you become a part of a big ocean of mind. I mean, if you're a drop and you become part of the big ocean of mind, that doesn't mean that your drop becomes the other drop, right? You're still one drop, and then this other person drop, and your drop and the other person drop are not identical. So the same is true for the mind. Your mind is your mind, and another person's mind is another person's mind. The continuum goes on parallel, but it's not the same. Which doesn't make us lonely. Not like, oh God, I'm like caught in my own mind stream. No, loneliness is just a creation of the mind, actually. Okay, we'll talk more about this. There is no overarching universal type of mind. Everyone's mind stream is a different entity from everyone else's mind stream. It is even different from the mind stream of a Buddha. Okay, but we have the same same basic kind of ingredients, if you like. However, even though all of us have a mind that is ever present and continues from moment to moment, we are so preoccupied with perception of external phenomena, with perceiving shapes, colors, sounds, etc., that we're not aware and thus do not understand our own mind. The one thing that's always with us. Isn't that funny? The one thing that is always with us, we know the least. From a Buddhist point of view, the body's not always with us. Okay, so, well, you may not see it that way. It's really funny when people say, yeah, I'm kind of like, now I'm like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60, you know, but I feel really young at heart. Like, I mean, my body may be like, you know, wrinkly and I have, you know, gray hair, etc. But I feel young at heart. Or like my mind feels really young. Come on, the mind is the oldest thing we have. It's been around so much longer than our body, from a Buddhist point of view, right? So it's actually the thing we have the longest. Unfortunately, we forget all our experiences. We forget, right? So, but if you argue, well, I've not lived in a previous life because I don't remember, well, then you haven't lived when you were 2 years old, because how much do you remember when you were 2 years old? How much do you remember of last week? Do you know what you had for lunch 3 weeks ago? No, right? So we're very good at forgetting, so no surprise we don't remember a lot of what we've done before. But what I'm trying to say is that that the one thing that is really always with us, it's our mind, and we just don't know it. We don't know so much about our body either, but our mind is a real mystery to us. Isn't that amazing? The thing that is responsible for our happiness, the thing that is responsible for our suffering, the thing that can bring about so much, that can help us so much in so many different ways, we don't understand that. How sad, actually, right? Okay. So, because we're so preoccupied with the objects. So because of this lack of understanding, the Buddha gave very sophisticated and detailed explanations of the mind. And what the Buddha taught is not theory, from a Buddhist point of view. It's praxis, it's what the Buddha himself has seen. Other lamas, when they talk about this is praxis for them. It's only theory for us, right? And they teach that which they have seen themselves. So it's not like made up or something. But of course, our problem is unless we practice this, we don't come to see it. So it's not like you can show you, oh look, here's my mind, show me yours. Right? It's just not going to happen. The only way you can become aware of mind is by understanding your mind, and I can only do it with my own mind. But like I'm saying, this is not a theory on mind. Well, it depends on who you're talking of. Talking of us? Yes, for us it's theory. For a Buddha or for a Lama or for someone who's really experienced this, for them it's praxis. That's exactly what they have experienced. So due to this lack of understanding, therefore, the Buddha gave very sophisticated and detailed explanation of the mind, of its function, its different aspects, its object, etc. Which is why Buddhism is often described as the science of the mind. Alright, so now, what follows? Am I still good with time? 20 minutes, right? Alright. I know it's stretching and I can see you're tired. Just hang in there. So what follows is a presentation of the mind according to the highest philosophical system, the Madhyamika Prasangika philosophical tenet of Buddhism. So I don't need to go into the Sautrantika system, no, get right to the explanation as it would be explained, like the final explanation on the mind. The rest, why is it explained differently from the point of view of a different philosophical system? Because it's like a stepping stone. But only if you have time to take those steps. So here, not necessary. Alright, definitions. Now, so what are definitions? The word definition in Tibetan, actually the word that they use is the same as the word, which is a characteristic. Characteristic, that's the word they use. Tseni, which can mean characteristic, it can mean definition. So really a definition is that which describes the main characteristics of an object that distinguish it from something else. Okay? Alright. So definitions are very important. In fact, when we study philosophy, in English you say, I study philosophy, I study debate. In Tibetan, what do you say? You study definitions. Actually, the Matseni Dagyo, that is to see, to learn, to study. Tseni means definition. If someone asks you, what are you doing? You're debating. So it's saying you're studying definitions. Okay. Why? Because what are we trying to understand? Ideas. Different Buddhist ideas, right? Understanding them through definitions, through defining them and gaining an understanding of them. That's really all it is. Understanding my own mind. First it's defined, what does it mean? And then I go look at my own mind and identify those characteristics. And by identifying those main characteristics, I identify my own mind. Alright, so then it says, in general, mind, consciousness and awareness are synonymous. Maybe not in the English context, but we needed 3 words in English because there are three words at least in the Tibetan. Okay, those are the equivalents. Now, what is a challenge? When you learn about philosophy, one of the main challenges is, first of all, understand those words. How do you define them? This was a challenge for Tibetans when they first learned about Buddhism. It was a challenge for Indians when they learned about Buddhism. And then Buddhism went to Tibet in the 8th century. And Tibetans didn't have a language to explain Buddhism. So what did they do? They created a new language, as you did too, right? In Israel, I mean, modern Hebrew, it's not that old. I mean, it's amazing the whole country speaks it, but it's really not that old. So, well, considering that there are quite a few similarities between Tibetans and Israelis, the amount of Israelis and the number of Israelis and the number of Tibetans are actually quite similar. 6 million Tibetans. How many Israelis?
8 million.
8 million now, okay. But you know what's really funny with Tibetans? No one knows whether it's 6 million. But it's been like 1959, people say 6 million. And so there's a joke saying, like a young couple is discussing how many kids they're going to have. And then she says, oh, it doesn't really matter, we're 6 million anyway. So who cares more or less, right? It's always 6 million. So Tibetans are kind of stuck because they never had like a way to count them. But kind of a similar number and similar in terms of modern Hebrew or ancient Tibetan. So like there were some interesting similarities. Anyway, so the point is that in Tibet, they just created a new language, which is why, even nowadays, there's ordinary Tibetan and there's Dharma Tibetan. And that accounts for a lot of Tibetans. When there's a Dharma teaching by the Dalai Lama, it feels like a picnic. Why? Because all these Tibetans come, but they don't understand what His Holiness is talking about. They don't know what the Dalai Lama talks about because it's a different language. So sometimes His Holiness talks about things that everyone can understand, and then he goes right back into philosophy. And that's when everyone unpacks their bread rolls and their tea. You know, what else are you going to do? You don't understand anything. So picnic starts. And for those who are really serious, they listen attentively, and the rest are playing with their kids and enjoying their picnic. Because it's such a different language. But of course in English, that was just not, I mean, it could have been an option, but it's like, what? You have to learn another totally different language. I mean, there's some weird words. Non-virtue is not a word in English. Well, bodhicitta obviously is not an English word, but there are quite a few words like Buddhist English, right? It's kind of Buddhist English. I can give you some examples, but they don't mean anything to you. And two things are of one nature. Huh? Two things are of one nature. What does that mean? Anyway, you don't know right now, so never mind. But that's not a word that is used that you find in the dictionary. Anyway, or a phrase that you can find in the dictionary. So there are a lot of ideas that you think like, I know that word, but that means something different to you. So it takes a while to get used to those ideas. Awareness, consciousness, and mind. You know those words, but you use them differently and they mean something different to you. So please be aware that a part of learning about Buddhism is slightly redefining the words. It's just a process. I mean, you can learn in Tibetan, then you have a big time learning vocabulary, but you actually can't get around it because the ideas that are presented here are just not part of our culture, but not part of Tibetan culture either. It's not like you're born a Tibetan and you know. No, you still need to learn. And that was the advantage I had when I learned philosophy. Although I didn't speak colloquial Tibetan initially, I couldn't speak to my classmates, I could only debate. Why? Because we learned to debate together. They couldn't debate, I couldn't debate, so I could debate with them. And when I was done, I was like, all right guys, go home now. See you later. Until I could say in Tibetan. Okay. So, why is it that we don't know this naturally? Because a lot of the ideas presented here are the opposite of how we think, which accounts for our problems. All right. So one is that we're not really aware of our own mind. So a lot of explanation, different words. Okay. So in English, one word is mind. In Tibetan, it's sem. All right. I just left this there. I don't know. I used to be really into this, like using the Tibetan words, but I've kind of moved away from it a little bit. That's the leftover of it. You used to even have Tibetan spelling in it, like Tibetan, serious Tibetan writing, but I took that out. Okay. Then another word is consciousness. In Tibetan, it's shepa. She means actually to know. Shepa is that which knows, which basically means, there are two words for knowing, so that which understands, that which has the potential to understand or perceive something or cognize something. All right, so that's shepa. So it can be translated as consciousness, as cognition, even as knower. And then there's another word, awareness, which in Tibetan is lo, which is pronounced, well, blo, it's actually pronounced lo. So they are mind, consciousness, awareness, and their objects are mutually dependent. So mind and its object, they're mutually dependent. Consciousness and its object. So mind, consciousness, and awareness are they're just different words referring to the same thing. So a mind or consciousness or an awareness and their objects. So a mind, for instance, an eye consciousness perceiving blue, it depends on blue, and blue depends on our consciousness. They're mutually dependent. Okay? Because if I say blue, well, there's the blue that you perceive, and that blue that you perceive is dependent on your mind, and your mind, the mind that perceives blue, is dependent on the blue. Right? And if you say there's another kind of blue, well, what would that be? Other than the one we individually perceive and individually perceive slightly differently. Okay. So, they're mutually dependent. A mind and its object are mutually dependent. Whatever is a phenomenon, Whatever exists is an object of an awareness, and there are no awarenesses that do not have an object. Alright. So the Buddhist scriptures on awareness and knowledge give the following definition. So now that some definitions are given. Okay. Now I'm not sure how helpful those are. Some of them are more helpful, others less. The definition of awareness is just knower. Not that helpful. Never mind. But the definition of consciousness, that's helpful. The definition of consciousness is that which is luminous and knowing. Now when you first hear this, you go, oh, that doesn't help me. But it actually tells you a lot. So this is why I've kind of explained it separately. Like I explained the word luminous, which actually in Tibetan it can mean clear or luminous. It's really weird. We wouldn't think of luminous and clear as having the same meaning, right? Luminous, clear. It actually means something that is clear. Clear. Honestly, it's the same in Tibetan. You go, what? Clear? What is that? I mean, Tibetans would have the same reaction. They know what clear means, like a clear window, right? Oh, the mirror is clear, or the window is clear. I can look through it. It all makes sense to us. But to think of our mind as clear, that's really weird. Knowing, a little easier. So, the word luminous, sometimes the word luminous is used, or clear knowing, or luminous and knowing. Alright, what does that mean? So, when we say, now you think of your own mind, think of your own mind. So, my own mind is clear. What? So it describes, this part of the definition describes the nature of the mind in that it is non-physical. So clear in the sense it's not obstructed by something physical, it's non-physical. Right? So like a window, of course, it is physical. But in terms of the appearance, nothing can obstruct it actually. Or the space in front of you is clear. There's nothing that can obstruct it. So our mind is not actually obstructed by anything. In the sense that anything can appear to you. Well, first of all, it's non-physical, and anything can appear to your own mind. Now, appear to your own mind, that's a weird idea. Something appears to your own mind. But you can easily do a test. Okay? If I ask you, look at the altar. Does the altar appear to your eye consciousness? Well, the altar definitely didn't enter your... Right? It's not like you see it. You have there's an appearance to your mind of the altar, but it's not like you're kind of having it. The altar is entering your mind. No, it's still over there, but it appears to you. It appears to your mind, right? What else would it appear to? So, of course, by way of the retina, we like to think of the just physical happening, and that's still the case. No one is denying that it's appearing to the retina, etc. But that is just talking about the physical happening. But the actual experience, the actual knowledge of this altar, that's the mind. That's the experience. That's what we call mind. And when you close your eyes and you think of the altar, is it still appearing? Yes, it is. So even though your eye consciousness, when you close your eyes, your eye consciousness is not actively just perceiving darkness. But it's now, when you look at the altar with your eyes, then it's the eye consciousness perceiving it. But when you close your eyes, to your eye consciousness only darkness appears. But to your mental consciousness, now the altar still appears. Or I ask you, think of your breakfast this morning. Does it appear? It appears. It appears. Think of your breakfast table. There it is. It's very easy. Why? Because the mind has that ability for things to appear. In fact, always something appears always. If I ask you to think of your mother, appearing. Think of your dog, if you have one. There it is. Right? Very easy. Think of your car. Okay. So the mind has that ability. It is not physical. It is based on the physical brain, yes, but it is non-physical in itself, and anything can appear to it. And that is described by the word clear, like a clear mirror, right? A clear mirror. So your mind can mirror the environment, right? It can mirror the things around you. so in that way, clear, they often use that aspect as like similar to a mirror. They use the mirror example. So first it was like clear, it's a weird idea, but slowly it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? As in like anything can appear to it. So that describes one aspect of the mind. So being non-physical, and it illuminates its object, which actually just means anything can appear to it. It illuminates. It's almost like, it's kind of like a switch on the light. It's not really like that, but they use this way of explaining it. Basically, it's just anything can appear to a mind, and therefore every mind has an appearing object. Okay? So every time you have a mind, there's always something that appears to the mind. Always. Alright. That's the first part. The second part of this definition of the mind or of consciousness is that which is knowing or cognizing. So this part describes the function of the mind. The nature of the mind is that anything can appear to it. It's more passive. And this is more actively describing the function that it can know its object. It describes the ability of the mind to know or cognize its object. It doesn't always do that. Not every mind. Sometimes things just appear and it's not actually actively cognizing them. But that means nonetheless that every mind has the potential to do so. Whether it's hindered by certain circumstances, that's different. But so that being the case, there's always an object that is apprehended. There's not just an appearance, but there's always something that is actively apprehended by the mind. That's a little harder to recognize. Your mind always apprehends something. And therefore, there's always an object of apprehension. Something that is hold on to, something that the mind is conscious of. Now you might wonder, what's the difference between the two? And it's quite easy. It's not that hard to recognize. There's always a main object of the mind. When I say altar, what is the main object? The altar. Right? The thing that you want to perceive, the thing that you pay attention to, that becomes your main object. That is the object your mind holds. And sometimes it cognizes it, it knows it. Other times it just holds on to it, but it may not know it's an altar, etc. Okay? Alright. But then there's also an appearing object. And not everything that appears to your mind is apprehended by your mind. In that there are things that appear to your mind, in the case of the eye consciousness perceiving the altar, that you're not even aware of. For instance, there's subtle particles in the sphere of vision. What you perceive, not the subtle particles of the back of the altar. Those you cannot, they're obstructed by the altar. But the ones that are facing you, that are in the sphere of your vision, right? Those subtle particles appear to you, because if they didn't appear, it'd be like Swiss cheese. You'd have holes in it. Well, if those subtle particles didn't appear to you, all of them, right, you wouldn't have the whole structure appearing. They have to all appear. So they appear to you, but you're not aware of them. So a lot of things appear to you that you're not aware of. Does that make sense? So a lot of things appear to you that your mind doesn't apprehend. So you can have an appearing object that the mind doesn't apprehend. But you also apprehend things that don't appear. You apprehend things of this altar, and this sounds like, what? They don't appear, but I apprehend them? Well, you apprehend not, opposite of not table, opposite of not altar. Not altar. Your mind automatically, when it perceives the altar, excludes not altar. But that doesn't appear. That's an abstract. That's only implied. That your mind apprehends that implicitly. Not altar. Right? So, because it's implicitly, it's just implied, your mind apprehends this implicitly, it doesn't appear. Not altar doesn't appear, it's just the altar, it's just the shape and color of this appears. Not altar doesn't appear, it's only implicitly apprehended. You see? So it's kind of complicated, it's not that easy, and to expect to understand the objects of mind right away, no, that's being too hard on yourself. But this would be what we do. So this is where I want to leave it tonight, and we'll go more into this tomorrow. If you already read ahead for tomorrow's class, that may be helpful. But your homework, your in-between session, doing, which is important, you keep the silence, is to pay attention to your own mind as you walk back to your room. Of course, it's very hard to do that. We're not used to looking at our own mind. It's very hard to pay attention, like, what is the experiencer? What is the experiencer?